We are now recording, Patrick, and you can start.
Okay. My name is Patrick Campbell. I'm from the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, Office of Employment and Training, and I'm the Program Development Division Manager for the state. We have 3 other contributors and presenters on this. And so why don't I go ahead and let each of you introduce yourself, and we can start with you, Jennifer.
All right, my name is Jennifer Foyle. Although I work for Northern Illinois University Center for Governmental Studies, we have an intergovernmental agreement with the Department of Commerce. So I work full-time with Patrick, helping to expand apprenticeship throughout the state. Lee?
My name is Lee Reese. I'm the Regional Apprenticeship Navigator for Economic Development Region number 9, which encompasses Madison, Clinton, St. Clair, Randolph, Monroe, Jersey, Calhoun, Bond counties, Washington, in southwestern Illinois across from St. Louis. Lucinda?
Hello, my name is Lucinda Phoenix, and I'm a Regional Apprenticeship Navigator for Economic Development Region number 8, which covers the 19 most southern counties of Illinois. I have 2 workforce areas, workforce area number 25 and workforce area number 26.
Okay, great. Thank you. I would like to start off by saying that both Lee and Lucinda's areas were in our pilot Navigator group. At the time, they were both intermediary and navigators, both of them, and they remain that way. They are on our group of new grantees, so they are continuing their efforts and the work that they had done in the past. Really, you know, they were both thrown into this, and it was a sink or swim. This was new to all of us. We had to figure out what this would look like exactly, although we had a template and a plan for the structure of this. There were so many dynamic pieces to this that it really changed as we moved forward. I think some of the training that the navigators went through really facilitated that, and that is the Talent Pipeline Management, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Talent Pipeline Management, and both of them are certified in that, and it really facilitated a foundation and moving forward. Although they are from Southern Illinois, they actually have implemented a lot of new ideas and can really give some good structural feedback on best practices for navigators. We continue to figure our way out through this process, and it is important to understand that the targets of the navigators may be structured mainly as reaching out to employers, but in the beginning, what will be really important for especially new navigators is to understand the structure of the program. So in many times, you'll be working with participants interested in, you know, where do I find out about apprenticeship programs? Another key point in this is you're not just going to, as a navigator, be working with intermediaries who are just our grantees. You'll be working with a wide variety of intermediaries. So they may not, you may have to reach out to them and work with them. They may not understand or have worked with the state programs, the federal programs. They may be just jumping into this brand new. But what we want to do is capitalize on the opportunity to maximize our deliverable of 800 new apprentices in the state of Illinois, registered apprentices in the state of Illinois. And that is going to take efforts and working with intermediaries who may or may not be grantees. So in many cases, navigators will have to work with those groups as well. This is a great opportunity today to learn from Lee and Lucinda, and I hope you find this interesting. We will all contribute as we move through the slides. So with that, we will move on to the next slide.
Yeah, so and just one thing I'd like to add, we chose Lee and Lucinda not only because they had to learn blindly, but then also their two regions are very different from each other. Lee comes from the St. Louis Metro East area, and he has 9 counties, but Lucinda is more rural and has 19 sprawling counties. So we've got a lot to learn from both of them. So what we're going to go over today is we're going to reinforce what the navigator's role is. By the time you've watched this video, you should have watched the foundations of apprenticeship, and you would have watched a business engagement video that was put on by Mayor and DOL, an excellent video. And so we don't want to recreate what was already created. We want to build on that. We're going to talk about mapping your region, and then if you get all this information about your region, how are you going to organize it? Building relationships is very key, so we're going to really talk about that. And then getting to commitment. If we're selling apprenticeship, how do we get to commitment? And do we ever really get to commitment in the way we think we're selling it? And then just communicating and sharing information, and then finally just kind of going over with Lee and Lucinda the barriers and challenges that they have faced and continue to face. So next slide, please. So just as the Apprenticeship Navigator's role, you all heard from Manny and Paul about how we came up with Navigator, and we love that term. So going to the definition, Navigator is one that navigates, to steer the course through, to make one's way through. So we chose that word because you guys are the point of contact for your region for apprenticeship. So you are going to steer the course for your region. You're going to help point people in the right direction. And can we go back? Because Lee was going to talk about the Latin verb here.
Okay, so navigator in Latin simply means sailor, or the individual who steers. Stendo decessio, one who shows direction, and that is what I think of when I think of the term navigator, is an individual that shows direction, a person who stands in the center of the spider web, and maybe a community-based organization calls out and they want something and you direct them to an education provider, or it might be that you direct them to a business, or a business to a community service provider, and so you're the center of the spider web and you send them in the direction they need to go.
And before we move on, I just want to ask you, Lee and Lucinda, when I ask you what it means to be a navigator, what does that mean to you guys?
Lucinda, you want to go first?
Sure, thanks, Lee. Navigator, it's such an appropriate title because the role literally involves charting a course through your region to network, meet people, and share information. But don't be overwhelmed by that, because every region is different and we're all going to kind of proceed at our own pace. You can't compare your region with another region. Mine is very different from Lee's, and that's one thing that I learned in this last year. And being a navigator, you're not alone. You have other navigators to communicate with, and reach out. If there's ever anything I can do to help someone, please reach out to me. It's been an exciting year for me, and I've learned so much.
And navigator to me means an individual who shows the direction, also does a lot of research. You really have to know your area real well and all the individuals that participate in that area, and be willing to do things that sometimes you think are outside of your job description to build trust and to build those relationships that are going to pay off. Sometimes a relationship may be 2 or 3 years down the road before it pays off, but if you'll put skin in the game, it'll come to you. And I also
can I add something to what you're saying, Lee?
Yes.
both you and Lucinda talked about the uniqueness of your areas, but I would like your feedback or comments on what I'm going to say, and that is it is critical that a navigator understand everything going on within their region. And that includes from the Department of Labor, what has been already registered and what their activities are in your region, all the way down to, small intermediaries that could be a cluster of businesses that may not be associated with you at any level, to the community colleges. So when Lee talked about a spider web, you are the center, and you can only refer and help navigate this if you understand how to chart that course.
Absolutely. You will find as you go along, as we did in the beginning, I'm sure Lucinda probably the same, is that there are many pieces of the bridge that have already been built. And what you will find as a navigator is it's your job to get those pieces and put them together. And as you do that, going forward, you'll get to the desire at the end, which is to build a really strong workforce in your region.
Yes, and
Very
that's
nice.
the ultimate goal. I agree completely. And I think it's really important to take some time. We're going to talk about some research and tools that we use, but take some time to study and research and learn about your region, because that will be very helpful. And you never know who you might talk with that may lead to a great idea for your area. The more you meet people, it will create sort of a ripple effect. And one day you're in your office and you get a phone call that you're not expecting from somebody that heard about a program going on somewhere else. So you will really literally have your hands in just about everything.
Very true. That's good, Lucinda. Next slide, please. So when I mentioned that we're going to build on the business engagement video that you all had watched, you had found out that they talked about 3 phases of business engagement, research and prep, building relationships, getting commitment. But the more I talked to Lucinda and Lee, we felt like there were some nuances, a little bit more to fill in the gaps, that those were very big general pots, and we can actually break it up a little bit more. So we actually came up with 5, and there's definitely overlap in these areas, but we're going to go through, that's how we've structured this, is going through these 5. So if you go to the next slide, please. So when we say researching and mapping your region, so Lee and Lucinda, what does that mean to you, and why is it important? And what comes to mind?
Well, our goal is to promote apprenticeships and how these programs can benefit employers and the workforce in our area. So you want to cast a wide net and share the message with as many people as possible. And there are a lot of people who have preconceived ideas about what an apprenticeship actually involves. And it's a much easier program to launch than what most people think, and it's not just for labor unions too. I hear that a lot. So you will be working with a number of agencies and groups and just anyone to get that message out.
And you will, from your partners, you will feed off of projects they already have going sometimes. What you'll learn from a chamber about an event or a business that's coming your way, or site selection for a company. And right away, as a part of your training that you're going to get, you're going to start thinking, how can I maximize and use apprenticeship to help that company as it comes on board? And so you'll use your partners to develop that talent pipeline to assist in some of the projects that already exist if you work with your partners.
Can I ask a question of both of you? How did you pull into the fold those organizations that seem to have, or intermediaries or groups that are already doing an apprenticeship program and seem to have their own agenda and kind of going down their own path and really haven't worked with you at all, what did you do to pull them into and start open dialogue and communication with them?
Well, for me, Patrick, because Mantracon is a WIOA provider, we have a lot of contacts and a lot of interaction with a number of different programs, schools, chambers throughout our area. So for me, that helped me a lot because we had that network built. And so if you aren't associated with a WIOA provider, that would be a good thing to begin as well too, because they can be a great partner and they have a lot of relationships established already.
And I too have a WIOA connection, and I'm on the business services team for my local workforce area 22 and 24. And so there are 27 different members from the community colleges to the community-based organizations to our WIOA co-partners. And so learning the services that they provide will really assist you in connecting pieces of the puzzle. Maybe it's a wraparound service, an education piece, but having the connection with your business services team is going to pay great dividends into who they know, because you may not know someone they know and they'll make the introduction for you, and that takes down some of the resistance.
Yes, I
Thank
agree
you.
completely.
Next slide, please. So Lucinda and Lee have given us just a wealth of information in that little part, but we put some resources here. Where do you start? So I just want to keep pointing everyone to apprenticeshipillinois.com. We are constantly updating it. If you have information that you think would be helpful to others, let us know and we'll add it to it. That new Apprenticeship Study Act report that came out, if you go to that, and you can find it on apprenticeshipillinois.com. In the appendices, there's a breakdown for each economic development region that tells you about work-based learning and apprenticeship programs in your area already. So you can already get started there. And then even look down at the last appendix, and you can see a listing of those programs so that you can contact them if you want. There's also the 2019 Illinois Economic Development Report that IDES put out. That is a wealth of information. It's also cross-referenced in the Apprenticeship Study Act report. You can find all kinds of regional data on Illinois WorkNet. You've got regional data packets, and it's the WIOA regional and local planning information. So there's a lot of information that already exists besides the internet, a labor market economist, and then also Lee and Lucinda have mentioned the others. Now, Lee, I want you to talk about regional cooperation. Just touch on that, what is at the bottom of this slide.
Regional cooperation means that you've developed relationships with your community colleges, your high schools, your offices of education, your business services team, your WIOA partners. And by sharing your vision and where you're headed with those individuals and finding out what their vision is, you can put the pieces of the puzzle in place and not have to duplicate effort. So regional cooperation is key.
And I love it that you had said, these are your words, build an army of collaborators, and it's a coalition of the willing. So if you go to the next slide, Lee had put together this one-pager, and I only have part of the page here for you, of things in his area, because he put this together when they were going to put together the application to become a navigator. So already this is what he works with and what he knows is in his area. So he already has 39 community-based organization participants, 5 chambers of commerce, 11 colleges. So you kind of get the idea here that this is what is in his area and what he's put together and what his partnerships look like. Now, how long did it take you to actually form these partnerships, Lee?
A lot of these partnerships took place over the 5 years prior to becoming a navigator, because as I was working for a local community college dealing with WIOA and vocational programs, I saw that sometimes my students wouldn't have a pair of glasses they need and couldn't afford them. And so I formed a partnership with Urban League. And so then I could refer that student over to Urban League to get a pair of glasses, or maybe they needed a suit. Urban League has a wonderful closet full of designer suits that are gifted to them. And so knowing where these resources are removes barriers for the individuals you're working with. And so you just need to build this. I add to this almost every day. If I get a new business card from somebody, it'll go to 226 today. So it's just an ongoing process.
It's like a living
Awesome.
document. Yes. Constantly adding to it.
Very good. Can you go to the next slide now? So, building on, we're not going to duplicate what we saw in the business engagement, but now we want to just talk about some of the favorite go-to tools that Lee and Lucinda use often. And so these are the ones that, just talking to them, we kind of teased out some of the ones that they use the most often. So we're going to look at each one of these individually. So let's go to the next slide and get started on Google Maps and Earth. Now, why would you use Google Maps and Earth, Lee and Lucinda? What kind of information are you expecting?
I use it to, it's been very helpful for me because I can look at an area as a whole. I can pinpoint where businesses are located. It's also been very helpful for me. Well, and let me back up here. Prior to becoming a navigator, I was actually a WIOA adult and dislocated worker program administrator. So I'm very familiar with WIOA and that process. But that was for my workforce area number 25. When I became a navigator, I also began representing workforce area number 26. And I wasn't as familiar with that area. So using Google Maps helped me to chart the area, begin looking at the area, just things like, are there similar industries that are close to one another? Does this mean that companies may compete for workers? My area is very rural, so there's a lot of usually drive time involved, especially with going across 19 counties. So that was very helpful for me, especially to prepare, especially if I was going out to meet with an employer or a business.
And Lucinda's about to take us through how to use it, but Lee, do you have anything to add about using Google Maps and Earth?
Yes, I actually physically use Google Maps sometimes to look at the size of a business. And so if I pull a business out of virtual labor market information, it's not going to tell me, is there 5 parking spaces? Is the business actually a small business? It'll give me an idea of the number of employees sometimes, but I can actually physically look at the business itself and glean some information from it.
That's great. Let's go to the next slide, and Lucinda's going to take us through.
Okay. Yeah, this slide, and most people are familiar with Google Maps, but if you aren't, take some time to become familiar with it because it's very helpful. And what this slide shows is, especially under the red arrow, there's actually a satellite image. And if you click on that image, if you've already added the address that you want to research, by clicking on that satellite image, it will really give you a picture from the clouds of that company. So if we want to go to the next slide, I have a large employer in my area, Ison Industries, and I had been contacted by an HR person there. I had actually, because of the role that I'd had before, I hadn't actually been out to the company to visit with them prior to that. So I was not familiar with the business, the layout, how to get out there even. So this helped me to visualize what the business looks like. And what I found is that they are actually 3 separate facilities. They each have separate HR departments and they all have a work process that is completely different from the other facility. They're under the Ison Industries umbrella, but they all do very different things and produce very different products. And have different shifts and working hours and that. So like I said, hadn't been out to the business before, so I pulled this up just to take a look at it to help me prepare. And these three businesses, amazingly too, also compete with each other in hiring workers. So that was helpful for me as well too, to know and understand that. The next screen is just kind of a street view. Like I said, I hadn't been out to the complex before, so I could actually zoom in this picture of the facility. It's a little difficult to tell, but it's actually three separate buildings, three separate entrances, three completely different parking areas. So because I wanted to be prepared and know where I was going, I zoomed in on the facility that I was going to just know where the address, the entrance was. I didn't want to be late. I had an appointment, and I wanted to be familiar with it before I actually got out there. So that's some of the reasons why it's been helpful for me.
Thank you, Lucinda. So if you go to the next slide, I think, Lee, you have another example of how you used Google Maps in Earth before.
Yes, this is a kind of a real world scenario. Southwestern Illinois College, SWIC, has a satellite campus in Redbud, Illinois. They've experienced a decline in enrollment for several years, and they wanted to revive the campus. And so I looked at Google Earth to find out how many manufacturing places were in the area, to kind of get an idea if putting manufacturing programs back at the Redbud campus would be feasible. Would there be enough students in that area for them to absorb the expense of expanding? And what I found was there were plenty of businesses, plenty of manufacturing facilities, machining shops within 20 minutes to 30-minute drive of that facility. Currently, the only choice that the students have is to go to the Granite City campus, which from Redbud is an hour drive, hour and 15, 20 minutes, depending on traffic, one way. And it's the reason a lot of students have identified they didn't want to take that particular education tract. So this is kind of a real world way to use Google Maps to kind of look. And then I also use Google Earth to do a drive, like if I'm going to St. Louis with the traffic they have over there, it's a little faster than I'm used to. So I like to map out the address and then drive the streets through Google Earth so I can see what stores where and where I need to turn here so I can be on time.
Oh, that's great. So next slide. So this is we're going to talk about the Illinois Virtual Labor Market Information, or sometimes they just call it VLMI. Now, can you all tell me why you use it and what kind of information you get from it?
This resource has so much information. I am still going through and learning about it. And Lee's been a great help for me. I couldn't figure out, I was trying to find a list of manufacturers. I was trying to pull up a list of manufacturers in a particular county, and I could not find the right button. I called Lee and he took me right to it. So I'm still finding ways to use this resource, but there's a lot of very useful information.
Yes, there's in addition to finding out the business name, address, it'll sometimes will have an accurate contact person for the business and a phone number. The NAICS code in there, which once you, if you're familiar with workforce, these are the codes used to track what a business does. Number of employees sometimes are in there, sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not. You have to remember when you're in VLMI that the individual business person is putting the information in. And I have actually had a manufacturer that had listed themselves as being a code for healthcare. So you'll know once you gain experience what looks right and what does not look right. Seeing 50 employees for BJC, knowing that they have 30,000 employees and they're our largest employer in the St. Louis region. So you would know immediately if you saw 55 to 90 employees that that's not right. But there's a lot of really good information in there. Sometimes the website's available. And so you can get a really good, and I take VLMI and I use it to make spreadsheets for my region. And next slide,
Perfect.
please.
And we'll go over that. Yeah, next slide. So you're going to take us through how to use it just kind of quickly.
That's right. So you would type in a web browser, Illinois Virtual Labor Market Information, or I usually just put Illinois VLMI, and this will take you to the sign in page. Next slide, please. If you'll notice above the red arrow, there's a home tab. Next slide, please. After you've clicked on the home tab, you'll get a page that looks like this, and down on the left-hand side is where the red area is a list for employers. Next slide, please. If you hover over the employers, the employer profile will appear. You'll click on employer profile. Next slide, please. And you'll get a search box. Next slide, please. And you'll notice by the red arrow, here's where you change your settings. And so I would go in here and put in local workforce area 24 or 22, or in a lot of times I do EDR 9, my economic region. Next slide, please. And I'll type in manufacturing. Next slide, please. And this is a list of manufacturers. And so there might be 25 pages of manufacturing in my EDR. Next slide, please. So when you click on one of these tabs, this is the information that comes up. So you have the name of the business, you have the street address, you have a website. It tells you the business description. They make pallets and skids, 20 to 49 employers. There's your NAICS code. The last time this site was updated was 2 of 20, so it's fairly been updated. Sometimes you'll find them 6 of 2015, so your contact person's probably not right, especially if it's an HR person, because they change for large companies frequently. And at the bottom, you have your information there. Next slide, please. I think there was supposed to be a spreadsheet here. Anyway.
Oh, we're going to talk about the spreadsheet later. Yes.
Okay, but I use that information to build out spreadsheets. So the in-demand things or the projects that I'm working on in my area, I will glean that information and collect it for later use. And we'll talk about a little later when we get to the spreadsheets, how we use that.
Awesome. Thank you, Lee.
You can use that for any industry, because as navigators, we're industry neutral. Many intermediaries focus on just maybe 3 or 4 specific industries. But as a navigator, we're open to reaching out to any industry about any type of occupation. So you can actually use that to go through and search on any industries in the area.
And it's very important to remember, and you'll know this from having done this once you have for a while, that employers put that information in, and an employer doesn't call, each employer doesn't call their position the same thing. So you might have a machinist in one company that someone else calls something completely different, industrial maintenance technician. And so to get the information you're looking for, you may have to put in several different jobs, titles, to get all the information you're looking for. So if you don't find something one way, just take it for granted that it's listed another way.
Yes, you might have to dig for the information. Yeah.
Lucinda, I like that you mentioned that navigators are industry neutral. You know, it brings it back home to kind of a jack of all trades. And I think that that is really important to have these variety of resources, because, you know, we do want to be able to facilitate this for all types of intermediaries, all types of employers, and all types of potential apprenticeship expansion within your region.
So the
Yes,
next
absolutely.
thing,
Sorry,
the
Jen.
next tool we want to, oh, no problem. The next tool we want to talk about is Help Wanted Online. I think it was Lee, you introduced me to Help Wanted Online, and I thought it was amazing. So Lee, why did you use it?
I use it to support my data-driven decision-making. So this information is actually compiled by our local labor market economist for the state. And what it does, it lists the top 20 jobs and the top 20 employers in the region. And so sometimes when somebody says, well, you know, this is catching on in my region, I can look at Help Wanted Online and find out, is it really catching on in my region, and should it be something I devote effort to? Lucinda,
Right.
you want to tell? Okay.
Yeah, you can take a quick look by pulling up the report to see which employers are posting Help Wanted ads the most in your area. So you can begin to get an idea of what are employers looking for? What types of occupations are they looking for? And the link to that Help Wanted Online is listed here at the bottom of this screen. I use this every month and look at this. When you access the website, it's going to take you to this page. You can do a statewide report for the entire state of Illinois, or you can do pull up a report by economic development region. Now, one thing I'll mention, they used to keep historical data. You could go back and look at, you know, maybe a year ago to see who was hiring in May of 2019. They've changed that because there was so much information. So now it gives you the most recent month. These are posted, these are updated the first of each month for that prior month. And here on this screen, we have actually pulled up a report for Economic Development Region number 1 for the month of June 2020 of this year. And as you can see on this, it lists the top 20 employers, top 20 occupations. So looking at this report, then we can quickly see the state of Illinois had 120 job postings for the month of June. Followed by Decatur Public Schools, Heritage Operations Group, and so on. The top occupation that was advertised for in the month of June was registered nurses, followed by retail salespersons. This can be helpful to, you know, for you to zone in on what employers are looking for, what their needs are. I used this recently to look to see which employers in my area were beginning to ramp up after, you know, our shutdown from the COVID pandemic. It was helpful for me because a lot of my employers had actually shut down for a while, and then, you know, they lost workers, so they were having to advertise and rehire for new workers. So
That is
I
perfect.
would encourage you to download this and keep the copies in a file, because since they do no longer keep this as historical data, just recently I was comparing June to March to look at how the landscape had changed with the employers, and it was completely different from my area. Manufacturing and warehousing were leading the way in March and April, but now retail and hospitality is leading in my region because of the amount of people displaced in those industries. So this can help you put historical perspective and to drive your data-driven decision making.
And that's a great point too, that some of the other reports that I had talked about, like the 2019 economic report, that's kind of old data, it was pre-COVID. So this is the more up to date for your region. So next slide, please. Now, Lee, you're gonna take us through why you use Indeed.com, and Lucinda, also feel free to jump in, but why do you guys use this? And what kind of information are you looking for?
Well, say an intermediary or a chamber hands a business off to me and says, hey, they're interested in apprenticeships or work-based learning, or they have needs related to employment. I go to Indeed.com to look at what they're posting their positions for. So when I get to the company, I have an idea what they're hiring. You can also get an idea about pay. You can look at the job postings to see, are they actually maybe a little pie in the sky with their posting? Could someone actually come in at a threshold skill and maybe be worked up? And so this gives you a good idea of what the business is doing currently with regards to their hiring process.
That's really good. That reminds me about how Aon, here, let's stay back just one more. How when Aon was hiring, that they were saying that they had to have a bachelor's degree for all positions. And then like what you just said, though, you're trying to say the pie in the sky, maybe the way they're looking for people are the wrong way. So Lucinda, do you use Indeed.com?
I do. Another way it's helpful is if one of the things that I found in talking with employers is that I might have an employer say, well, I need some folks with some welding skills. One of the things that we're trying to do is we have a couple of different companies with the same need. So we are looking at how could we provide some welding where both companies could send their employees to one class. So by looking at Indeed, then I can see, okay, how many of my machinist companies are looking for candidates with welding experience. And that might be something to help build on when you look at what kind of training is needed, and can you get some companies to partner together.
That is incredible. And that kind of helps the intermediary. You're trying to help do, like what they're trying to do is aggregate the needs of all those businesses, bring it all together and help many at one time.
Yes.
Next slide. So Lee and Lucinda, why do you guys go to employers' websites? What kind of information are you looking for there?
Just to become even more familiar with that employer. I will look to see what kind of products they produce, what their services are, maybe how many employees they have. Do they have any partner companies that they work with? One of the things I also look at too is to see how recently the website was updated. Not all employers are as tech savvy as the next. They may have had a website set up for the company that's now 5 years old. So obviously some of the information is going to be very different, but using all of these tools, you can begin to gather a pretty good picture of the company.
Yes, and recently I went to, I was in VLMI and I went to the company's website and it said they were a manufacturer. Well, when I opened it up, it turns out they're a chemical company. They produce chemicals. Yes, they manufacture, but they manufacture chemicals. Most people, when they think of manufacturing, think of metal and products and building and putting things together. So going to the website sometimes will help you understand what the company actually does. And looking at their mission statement, how they value, whether they value people or maybe they value being a lean Six Sigma company that makes very few errors and prides themselves on the smoothness of how they deliver and work with the supply chain. So you can get this from their website.
I would like to add in there that I would think it would be important for a navigator prior to meeting with a company or going out to them to take a look at this information and see how that matches up with existing apprenticeships already, because those competencies have been developed. You can take a look at those competencies and you can see that will greatly expedite the registration of an apprenticeship. And I think that, you know, making that connection to give that company some ideas would really help facilitate that connection.
Yes.
Next slide, please. So Lucinda, this is your ISIN group.
Yes. Yes. And this is where it really drove home that even though these three facilities are ISIN Industries, it's ISIN Manufacturing, it's ISIN Light Metals, it's ISIN Electronics. And they're very good about keeping their website very up to date, but I could actually go to each individual business and look at, you know, the products that they produce. Like I said, I also look to see, you know, they advertise their positions as well too. So, you know, I begin to get an idea about, are they looking for entry-level folks? Do they have maybe middle management positions that they're trying to fill? They may have a need to upskill entry-level workers to fill some of those middle management positions that they have. And So I began to think about what possible training options might be available to them as well too. And to also do some research about maybe some potential training providers that may be helpful for them too. Because we're also, uh, we should remain neutral when it comes to the training providers. So when we actually start talking to an employer about some training options, you know, be able to present them with a variety of different resources of that training that they could use.
That is perfect. Could you go to the next slide, please? And Lee, can you explain what kind of information you get from this employer's website?
Well, this is actually more like a trade situation. You can go to your industry association pages, and that will help you link to multiple employers in one type of cluster. And so you can see who kind of partners with each other. And sometimes on a employer's website, they'll have linkages to businesses that they work with. And so by looking at the page and looking at some of the associated pages, it can give you ideas of other individuals that might need the same training or apprenticeship or.
Excellent. Now, we also said, I just noticed that we don't have a slide for Glassdoor. So Lee, do you mind just talking quickly why you use Glassdoor and what kind of information you get there?
Yes, Glassdoor. I came across Glassdoor because I teach career pathways with one of the colleges, and some of the things that you would have the students do is look at the top questions that you would see on an interview and the pay scale. Well, that's a good place to look at pay scale, but there's also feedback from people that have worked at this company. And so you can't make everybody happy that works at a company, but if you get a company that's down in the 40% and a lot of the things are about management or about the way they treat their employees, or it's not a safe working environment. These are all little things that under talent pipeline management, you may want to have a conversation and you want to be skillful about how you approach it, but you might want to bring this subject on to try to help the business to better themselves. You know, you can say, hey, on Glassdoor, you know, you might want to look at Glassdoor and take a look at it, and let's see if we can work together to get that up.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. So you're being a really good consultant to these businesses at times. So going to the next one. So we've talked about all this research and prep you're doing before you ever even meet employers. You're finding out your area. What do you do with all this information? You know, sometimes you can be inundated. How do you organize the information? So we'll start with you, Lucinda. What do you do with it?
I use a lot of spreadsheets. Now from the VLMI, you can download those lists of employers into a spreadsheet already. Then you can begin to, you know, sort it by however you need. You can add to that information. As I make new contacts, I go to my spreadsheet and add that person. You will be meeting so many new and different people that being able to keep track of all this information, for me, the spreadsheets that's just my system. Lee, I think, does a lot of the same thing. That's a system that works for me. But also, you know, we'll be doing some quarterly reporting that we'll be sending to DCEO. So these spreadsheets are helpful to keep track of that, because when you submit your quarterly reports, you want to show them, you know, every place that you're touching. And it just helps me to keep on track and to have a list of all the people I'm meeting with.
Thank you. And
one of the things
next slide. Yeah, go ahead, Lee.
One of the things you're going to find as a navigator is that you're going to be the information disseminator to a lot of the people you're working with. So if you'll go ahead and plan ahead and have your spreadsheets organized with that in mind, that someone may call you and say, I would like a list of all the manufacturers in LWIA 24. Well, if you have it in EDR 9, but you don't have it broke out in 24, it's just going to take you extra time. But if you build your spreadsheet with EDR 9 tab and an LWIA 24 and LWIA 22, when somebody calls, all you have to do is right click, copy and paste and send that information to them. So it's going to save a lot of extra duplicate work if you'll just plan ahead on how you organize your information. Some people are old school. They keep business cards or they got a Rolodex. I'm a spreadsheet person. So all of my contacts, my CBOs, my education facilities are all broken out in tabs in a spreadsheet so that I can access that information. So if a regional office of education called and said, hey, I would like to know what community-based organizations you're working with, I can send them a list. And so that's kind of how I roll. I just plan ahead that somebody's going to call me almost all the time wanting something, and I'm just going to get it to them.
I know we're running tight on time, but I wanted to add in one last point about this organizing your tasks. So, Lucinda and Lee, do you have a or perhaps we could create a routine activities or tasks that you do as a navigator between the two of you, and we could post something. And by that I mean, what do you do daily? What do you do weekly, monthly, or quarterly? And just something that's a checkoff list that lists all of these things that would, I think, really help a new navigator in, and of course they could customize what they want to do, but I think that would be a really useful resource for us to get posted out there if you guys would be willing to contribute to something like that.
I think that's a great idea, and we can help with that. So first of all, I want you to explain here, Lee, about this. This particular one is just your VLMI data that you've collected in the spreadsheet. Now, did you just export this straight from VLMI, or how did this come about?
No, you can export the list of employers where it had the blue individual employers. You can export a list of that, but the metadata contained inside those links, you have to open that, and then there's no way to export that for all of them. You have to do it one at a time, hand by hand. Luckily, I have an intern that works in our department, so I can show her where the information is, and she does the spreadsheets for me. But to Patrick's point, my day, week, month are all sometimes put out fires. I get pulled away to work on a grant, or I may have to, somebody calls and they want to work on this project. So I do have things that I do on a regular basis, like look for chamber events the last week of the month and schedule the ones that I feel that are important, or meetings. And there are a few things I do in the morning, like return my email contacts for the first 30 minutes of the day and phone contacts. So there are some routine tasks we could put together, but a lot of it is on the fly for me.
That's true for me as well, too.
Is it real?
Yeah, I may have, I kind of chart my week, similar to Lee, but, I may receive a referral, from one of my partnerships at one of the community colleges. They may call and say, hey, I just talked to an employer. I just briefly talked about the apprenticeship program. He's really interested. Could you give him a call? So it could change very quickly, and being flexible, helps with that as well, too.
I think that's key, is this flexibility. All right, one last thing before we get off of the organizing information, and this is just one spreadsheet, but you have actually like 4 main spreadsheets, don't you? So you kind of organize things in different ways.
Yes, I have one with the businesses and the community-based organizations. That's my contacts list. And then I have the VLMI one. I also have one that I call time and effort, because I've always been in the grant world. People wanted to know how much of a percentage you did this or you did that. that time and effort also helps me when I do my DCEO reporting, because I can look back and see that I attended this meeting here, or I did this, or I devoted time to this project, because it's we do so many things. As you age and your memory starts to falter, you want to be able to look back and find that information when someone asks for it. So yes, I do have quite a few.
And you bring up a good point, because people are going to ask you for information, and now you've just built out a way to access it quickly for them. So let's go to the next one. So we've done all of this research and prep, you know, which is ongoing. That never ends, I assume, for you guys. And then you organize that information. But now we're going to go into building relationships. So what does that mean to you, Lee and Lucinda?
Well, you know, to me, you know, our goal is to obviously promote apprenticeship, but apprenticeships can build from a number of different ways. And that's another reason why it's really helpful to establish a partnership with your WIOA provider. Those WIOA providers, because of the nature of their work, they're looking for work sites for some of the programs that they can assist with funding. It's all the ways work-based learning could be helpful to an employer and the workforce in our area too. And that's why I've enjoyed working with this so much, because it's all about the end product. It's developing our workforce. It's helping our employers to look at different ways of doing business. And, you know, just having a part in seeing those opportunities grow within, you know, my home area.
And so this is about the long game. And so building your relationships with people is critical. And so as the navigator, when people ask you to do things, sometimes I may get asked to go and talk to a high school class about emerging technologies or jobs or how to do their resume. These are all things that are in my wheelhouse that I'm comfortable with. You may not be when you first start, but it's important that you do that, because as you gain that exposure and become that go-to person for everybody, it helps build the relationships and trust that you're going to be there when they need you. And then secondly, always come through on your after action item. So if someone tells me that they're interested in an apprenticeship, and I tell them I'm going to get them a set of standards, that's the first thing I do when I go back to the office is email Bruce Hallam, who's my U.S. Department of Labor contact, and I say, hey, Bruce, I need a set of standards for. And then as soon as it comes to me, it goes right out to them. And so if I'm always producing what I have said I would, I have built credibility. And that built credibility and trust is what's going to get you your apprenticeships and your connections.
And you've built that regional collaboration, and everyone knows you, right? And so tell me, How many business cards have you gone through in the past year?
I just finished my third box, so that's 3,000 in the period that we have. So I was joking the other day about, you know, COVID has cut down on my costs as far as office items, because I haven't gone through as many business cards. But you could go to a chamber event before COVID, and there might be, in my region, 300 or 400 people there. And so business cards went pretty quick.
And how did chambers, just quickly before we move on, can you just tell me about your experience with chambers and how you've used them?
Chambers were the gold mine for me. They really upped the game for me. I was kind of struggling at first trying to figure out how to make personal contacts with the smaller businesses in the region. And I went to a chamber event. And at that chamber event, I made probably 50, 60 contacts. And as I started to tell people the services that I provide and what I tried to do, it built interest. And so from those contacts, I have received so many referrals of businesses. As a matter of fact, I have a business with me now that is doing 17 apprenticeships, and that was a chamber contact. The chamber knew that they were struggling with their HR department being able to find talent. They passed them off to me, and I'm glad to say we're up to 17 apprentices in this second round as a result of that chamber contact.
That is beautiful. Let's go to the next slide. So that's just employers and partners just in general building relationships. But Lucinda, can you tell me about when you go to meet with an employer and you're building that relationship, what all happens?
Well, a lot of times they're sometimes confused on who I am and why I'm actually coming to talk to them. So one of the things that I usually try to clear up is, why I'm there and how I may be able to connect financial resources for them to help them if they have some specific training needs. So I try to start it off by, I guess, for lack of a better word, winning them over by, mentioning the financial incentives that may be available to them. That will usually get their attention. But I also mentioned, hey, I'm not promising anything, but there may be these resources available to you that can help you. And by studying the company ahead of time, I have a pretty good idea of maybe what their needs are. So I just ask some leading questions to get them to talk about that more. And a lot of times I will throw out questions that they may not be expecting, like, okay, well, where do you get your candidates? Or if you're having problems expanding your workforce, what are some of those reasons for that? One employer that I met with, he said, well, nobody wants to work full time. Everybody I talk to wants to work part time. And I said, well, why not take 2 part-time positions and make it, one full-time position? Take 2 part-time people working in the, at the same thing. And he's like, well, we've just never had part-time positions. And I said, well, it might be a way to expand, and get the talent that you need. So, but I do a whole lot of listening before I try to do much talking, because it's really about them and their needs.
And if you go to the next slide, so we had some leading questions here. We have a tool that's going to be that is on Apprenticeship Illinois that are some leading questions also. And like you said, you do a lot of listening. How about you, Lee, when you're with an employer?
The same way. If you have done your homework and you know a little bit about the business, that helps you not ask questions that they really think you should have already researched before you got there. And if you stumble into it not prepared, they're going to know it, and that's going to really tear down the trust level, and it's going to put up some resistance. So knowing the questions that you really have to ask that you couldn't pick up from research is really, I kind of put that to the end, but I really want them to tell me what they think is wrong, and then I can try to help to come up with a game plan for them moving forward.
And if you go to the next slide, would you explain to me what you do about this business observation survey?
Yes, at the end of dealing with a company, I tell them that I'm on the business services team for LWIA 22 and 24, kind of explain a little bit about what that is. I talk about our one-stop center and some of the services that are available. And then I ask them, I say, well, I want to ask a few questions about your business, because I'm going to go back and I'm going to refer you to the person that can provide for your needs if it's not me. But some of this information I'm going to ask you is going to help them better screen for candidates that you need. It doesn't do you any good to send them a welder if you didn't take the time to figure out that they use laser welders, or they're not using MIG welders, they're using TIG welders. So you have to have this pointed information to save them time and save them over contacts by other members of your team. I was extremely surprised in a contact with U.S. Steel to find out that U.S. Steel, who gets 5,000 applications probably a month, doesn't use an applicant tracking system. They lay eyes on every single resume. And so an individual working with somebody at a one-stop center would need to know that, because instead of writing the resume to fit a machine, it needed to fit a person. And so this is the kind of information that I collect, and I disseminate this out to our.
And Lee has actually made this available to us in Word format so that you all can modify it, and we put it on apprenticeshipillinois.com. So can you go to the next slide? So this is just one last slide about, talking with employers. I think that you had a story, Lucinda, about many employers don't have job descriptions, and so you just kind of clarify what they need. Could you just embellish just a little?
Yes, we, in working with our business services team, a lot of times we'd have an employer call and say, we need welders, like, I'll build on Lee's example there. Or, maybe a CNC machinist. Well, once you start drilling down into that, you begin to learn that there are very specific job functions that employer may need that may be very different. And like I said, one of the things that we've found is a lot of employers in our area don't have job descriptions. They know what their workers are doing, but to have a hard copy job description. So our business services team can actually help them with preparing those, which can be helpful if they're interested in launching an apprenticeship, by having those specific tasks on paper. That can help as you're helping them to build that apprenticeship program.
And you can also help them build backwards from a set of standards. So if they ask for a set of standards for a welder or a CNC mechanic, the job tasks and needed functions and required skills are in that set of standards. So you can actually help the employer to develop that job listing from a set of standards.
From a set of apprenticeship standards is what you're talking about, Lee, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very good. And then also just, I remember both of you had mentioned that not all employers call different occupations the same thing, so that it's getting to really know what they need and helping them clarify. So next slide. So we've done all of this research and this prep. We've built some relationships, and it's all really for connecting. Can you guys just talk just a little bit about connecting and what you're doing with information and your relationships?
Sure. Connecting can be any number of things. It could be an individual asking you what services are available in their area. Referrals could be you go out and talk to a business and find out that what they actually need is a hookup with a local high school to do internships that lead to apprenticeships. I have that in my area now. So it could be that the local high school vocational program needs a piece of equipment. As a navigator, I've gone out and begged for equipment from companies and actually got them to donate equipment to the local high school so that they could train on the machines that hopefully they'll get jobs in the future for. So it's just really about building all those connections in different directions and trying to move assets to where they're needed.
And how about you, Lucinda?
Yeah, one of the things, we were working with a healthcare provider, and they kept talking about needing registered nurses, which is a big need, not only in our area, but in many areas. Well, as we continued to talk with them and, talk about those needs, we began to see that it wasn't just registered nurses, but they actually needed very specific training with critical care. And so it helped them to identify, okay, we can just continue advertising for registered nurses, but our greatest need are those with a critical care background. So that was one of the ways. We also discovered too that they were having problems finding instructors, and that was stalling some of the pipeline in getting more registered nurses trained in our area. It was difficult to find the instructors. So we began discussing different ways that we might be able to get a larger group of instructors to train some more nurses, by offering maybe retired nurses that option, or maybe nurses who were within 5 years or 10 years or so of retiring to maybe going to part-time work, and then the other part of their day would be in teaching. So we began to help them look at some different ways of doing things, basically.
Very good, thank you. So next slide. So, the culmination of your research, knowing your area, is really coming to making connections for employers. Lee, I think you have an example about East St. Louis Career Academy and TerraSource. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. So we have been working with a global company called TerraSource Global, and they make huge machines that make little things. So they might crush rock or coal or some type of product. And so they're huge machines. They were having a problem finding skilled workers, so we helped them to develop some apprenticeships. Got the apprenticeships up and running, and we referred them to the local high school to start a talent pipeline. So they started to source some of their individuals through internships from Belleville to District 201. And so from 201, they hired 3 out of 4 people, and they moved them into a registered apprenticeships that start this August. So using that model, I reached out, and East St. Louis Career Academy wanted some opportunities for their students. And so TerraSource, being the global player that they are and have stepped up the way they did, I referred that the East St. Louis Career Academy to TerraSource. TerraSource called yesterday and told me that they had gone out to East St. Louis Academy and found that the training facility for the kids was woefully inadequate. So he's sending his engineers out to redesign the training space. He's also going to provide equipment for them to train on and material for them to train on. He developed a internship program similar to Belleville's, where he'll bring the students from East St. Louis into his business with the option of them coming into a paid apprenticeship once they complete the internship and they complete school. So it was a wonderful partnership that's really paid off.
And you have, in TerraSource, you really have a business champion then in your area. So they've kind of, would you explain more about that?
They've really stepped up. They're sourcing from South Tech and North Tech in St. Louis, which are schools that have troubled youth. So they've really invested. We referred them to Kewanee Prison in Illinois. They had a policy that they would not accept convicted felons, but they went up and looked at the highly skilled and highly trained individuals at Kewanee. So the vice president was so impressed with their training, he came back and he changed their global policy on convicted felons, donated equipment to Kewanee for them to train for their testing at TerraSource, and has since hired one that has been released from Kewanee prison. So it's things like this that the Navigator, you have to know these underserved populations and try to get them an opportunity to really change their life. And when you find these players like this that you're dealing with in an apprenticeship, you can really affect some positive change.
And you're, not every area has such a great business champion such as TerraSource, but you find those business champions, and I know that they've even talked to other businesses for you through events, which has been great because employers love hearing from other employers and seeing that they're actually taking chances. Could you go to the next slide, please? Could you talk to us about how you're doing referrals, Lee? Now talk about this email
Okay, if
specifically?
you look at the top, the two list, all of these are individuals that are part of our business services team for LWIA 22 and 24, so for economic region number 9. And so when I go out and I talk to a business, we have developed a business protocol that we don't want people stepping on each other's toes. We don't want 3 people going out to a business when one could do it and then make the referral. So each person in our business service team has been cross-trained. We know what each other provide as far as services. So when someone goes out in our group, we have created an Outlook group. And so if I, like in this case here, I talked to the president of Kaskaskia College. And so after I come back, I just spend a couple of minutes and I dink out a quick email on who, what, when, where, how, and why, and what needs to be followed up. And I send that to everybody in our business services team. And I label it the business or entity that I contacted. So when an individual on the business services team is going to go out and talk to somebody, if they want to see if that business has been touched by the business services team, they can just do a quick search, Kaskaskia College, and any emails related to that will pop up. But this helps us to know what everybody on the business services team is doing and how to refer people to each other. So had I needed to have something done with Kaskaskia College by another business service team member, I would have made another paragraph and said, okay, Alan, I need you, they want some veteran services. I need you to contact the president and follow up with this. And then he would later dink me back an email letting me know what happened when he met with them.
Nice. And Lucinda, how do you do referrals? Do you have an Outlook group that you do this, or do you have certain protocols?
Yes, we use email a lot. Like I said, I'm lucky because Mantricon is a WIOA provider. Well, our youth administrator for the youth program, the youth grants, they are all the time looking for work sites to temporarily place youth into positions. And I stay in touch with her a lot to find out what businesses she's visited, and she always keeps my flyers for apprenticeship with her as well too, because occasionally we have an individual, which we had this. He was a youth, started out in our youth program in the work experience program, which is actually a temporary program. The employer was so impressed by this young guy that we actually ended up moving him into an apprenticeship program. And it was because of, the WIOA youth administrator and helping to make that connection too. The vet reps with IDES business team are always out in the area meeting with businesses as well too. They're another great resource to me. Hey, I talked to this employer the other day. They're trying to encourage them to hire a veteran, but I think this might turn into a good apprenticeship opportunity as well too. So that's why it's, making all these connections is really important and helpful.
And you all made a really good point. You both said it differently, but the navigator function is more than just one person. You all have kind of cross-trained people on what you do, and so you have a bigger network or a bigger reach.
And that's an excellent point. One of my local CDL providers wants to establish some apprenticeships in CDL. So instead of me going and kicking all the tires, I just took the VLMI segment out of my spreadsheet that had all the trucking companies, and I sent it to her and I said, well, if you'll make contact with these companies and you get somebody that's interested in a CDL apprenticeship, give me a holler back and we'll get together. So she's out there doing work for me. So, sometimes you just have to work smarter and not harder.
Yeah,
Perfect.
And it all ties together. It's amazing how it all ties together.
Next slide, please. So tell me about how you support existing or help establish new intermediaries. Lee, why don't you go first?
Okay, so a lot of your intermediaries in the area are actually doing intermediary functions, just don't know it yet. Your community colleges, they're constantly out there kicking the bushes trying to get people into the classroom and into the seats. And so if you'll train them on how an apprenticeship works and some of the funding available, that and make them an intermediary, they can actually make that contact, bring you to the table, you get the apprenticeship up and running, and then they will handle the intermediary functions on the back end. And there are lots of trade groups out there. Currently, I'm signing up America's Central Port because they have 85 businesses that they service. So there's a lot of individuals out there that if you get them the training and you work with them, you can.
And Lucinda, how about you?
Yes, I do. I do a lot of that as well too. And something to keep in mind too is that employers may not always be big fans of some of the training providers in your area, and vice versa. I've been working with one of the colleges to get some of their career programs registered as apprenticeship programs, and one of his comments to me was, well, you know, I struggle because some of these employers, you know, the students we have in the welding program, they get to that last semester and they're snatching them up before they finish their program. And I said, well, that might be a great opportunity to turn that around, to bring everyone to the table and talk about, hey, here could be some of the benefits if you take on one of these students only part-time for now, allow them to finish their program. And if you're helping them with that program, there's a tax credit available. But it can also help that employer to share with that college representative, well, hey, I really need them trained in these specific areas as well too, but it gets those conversations going. So one business I had that I was working with had a community college right down the road. The vice president of the company had not had a good experience with the college. They wanted to go with another training provider. So, I tap danced around that one a little bit, but we're all, trying to do the same thing, so it worked out.
That's good. Very good. All right, next slide, please. Now, I know that some of the intermediaries and navigators have worked together to host events, and sometimes it's just the navigators. But Lee, you guys put on a great event. Can you tell us why you did that? And we can go to the next slide too, and what came out of it.
Yes, we wanted to host a regional apprenticeship meeting to bring businesses in to talk to other businesses. And we wanted to kind of dispel some of the myths related to apprenticeship, that it was cumbersome, it was too much effort to get off the ground, it was too much paperwork, it was all these little myths that they talked about in the videos that you guys have watched. But we held this event January 23rd at the Collinsville Center. And here's the agenda and who we had speak. And so we were extremely strategic in how we put this together, because we wanted to target specific parts of business and industry. And we also wanted to have legislators there to see how workforce development was working to fill the critical needs of business. And so this event went extremely well. We had about 120, I think, people show up. We had people from just the general citizenry all the way up to congressmen there, and this event went extremely well and was well received. We got a lot of feedback, and we developed apprenticeships with some of the folks in this particular event. And
I was present, and I just have to say, hearing TerraSource, and I think you even had some other employers as well. I mean, they were really selling the product for you. So it was the employers that are sold on this that were actually making such a great claim.
Absolutely. Antolin. Yeah, Antolin,
yes,
Nashville was
exactly.
there, and West Star Aviation, and they did a wonderful job.
Mm-hmm. And have you all had? Yes, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I really wanted to come to this, and due to the weather, I couldn't travel that day, so I didn't get to be there. But we actually had something very similar in our area last September. And we opened it up to manufacturing and healthcare, and we actually had an employer panel speak on their challenges, their issues, and what was nice for our area is that a lot of our employers began to talk with each other, and it was helpful. Many of them commented on, they were surprised to find out that everyone has very similar issues. So we began to get them talking, and as a result of that, we have an employer in our area who will make an excellent champion for a lot of the efforts that we have underway as well too.
That's incredible. Okay, next slide, please. Dun, 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 dun. So we've been talking about some awesome things that you all have done pre-COVID, going to events personally, handing out those cards, having these big events. Can you tell me what you do now during COVID? And can you do your work as a navigator with COVID going on and not being able to personally meet with people? How about you start?
4 letters: Zoom, 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 Zoom. 4 letters. So yes, it's death by Zoom now.
Okay.
So yeah, pretty much everything you could do in person, you can do with Zoom. It's not the same thing as reading body language and the things that you had when you were in person, but the show must go on. And so with the show must go on, you adapt to what you have and you just think outside the box. So our follow-up event to this regional apprenticeship was going to be a regional talent forecast, where we did the same thing with the center. We brought in businesses, and then we brought in community college members and high schools, and we brought in community colleges and local training providers, and they were going to give a forecast of the employees that they were going to have graduating, and we were going to have this right there in April so that the businesses could source their talent. So since we can't do that, we're just going to create an online component of that to be announced at some time in the future. You just have to think outside the box. If you get stopped one way, you go a different direction. It's not a barrier or an unstoppable, unmovable object. You either go over it, under, around, or through it.
And how about you, Lucinda?
Yeah, when COVID hit and, we were under the shelter at home, a lot of things in my area came to a screeching halt. And our colleges really began to scramble because for some of the apprenticeships that we had going on, the classroom work could continue. They just switched it to an online method. But some of the coursework that they needed, involved working in a lab and actually being hands-on at the college. So it got delayed, but they're looking at ways to either do that virtually or maybe just have it on hold until the fall semester. But yeah, a lot of things shifted. One of the employers, we were just getting ready to launch an apprenticeship program with another employer. We had started looking at candidates. We were going to start 5 apprentices. And then when COVID hit, they decided to delay hiring any new employees right at that time. So that kind of stopped. And I followed up with the company a few weeks ago, and the person in charge of that had actually left. And so someone had taken over for him. So I am actually working with him now to kind of re-educate on what we had been planning to do with that particular apprenticeship program. So it just, it slowed, and like Lee mentioned, lots of Zoom meetings.
The show goes on. All right. So we have
let me just say one last thing about that, in that, all navigators are going to have to look at this. And I think, what's important is to have your kind of laundry list of potential opportunities that this has presented to itself. So like it or not, we need to capitalize on the virtual reality training opportunities and present those opportunities to employers that may not have considered those opportunities in the past, and how we can be value added and a return on investment for them when they are struggling right now to figure out other resources. If you have that list and you can talk to them about that, then you can take this opportunity to present expanding new types of apprenticeships that they may not have previously considered. So I think that we really have to think of this as an opportunity to present new opportunities.
And let me
Absolutely.
just expand something there. As a navigator, you're going to be called upon to find the magic bullet for almost everything. And so like with COVID hit and people went to Zoom in some of these trainings, there was an opportunity there to use your chambers to do the training to teach people how to use Zoom. So I actually did that. I actually went to my chambers and said, hey, will you guys provide training for Zoom for these businesses so they can continue to do what they need to do? And they did.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, Lee, you told me the other day about how you will probably continue, even when we can go see people in person, you will continue using Zoom meeting with employers.
Yeah, it reduces cost, it reduces travel time, it allows me more time in the office to work on creative projects. So yes, I intend to continue.
Yes.
All right. So
Me
we're
too.
at selling the product. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing with Lee.
Yes. And so we want to wrap up in about 10 minutes. And we did, the next few slides aren't going to take us that long, but let's go through this. So selling the product. You know, you're not intermediaries, but you've got to really know what it is about all of this. So could you tell us what you told me yesterday, Lucinda, about, you know, knowing about the different standards and all?
Yes, one of the things that I did, we have a great Department of Labor Office of Apprenticeship representative in our area for me and Lee. His name's Bruce Hallam, and he has been a wonderful resource to me because even though the intermediary will in most cases be the one to you know, create all the paperwork, finalize, cross the T's, dot the I's, submit the registration to DOL. You still may end up doing some of that yourself as well too. So I wanted to understand the process from beginning all the way to the end. And Bruce Hallam was very helpful with that. He actually sent me samples of the documents and explained why they're used and how they're used. Because when I went to meet with a business, it's helpful to me to see the whole big picture because I don't want to steer them wrong. I don't want to give them wrong information, but I also, by knowing what's involved, it helps me to convey to them, you know, this isn't a lengthy process, you know, and here's who can take care of these things for you. We want to make this as easy as possible. This is to be a benefit to you, not a hindrance. You don't have to be weighed down with a lot of paperwork. If I can't do it, we've got others who will do it. So helping them to understand that.
So next slide. So Bruce, excuse me, you said Bruce. Lee, would you tell us, you know, you help employers figure out how to even make it simpler. Can you run us just through this quickly?
Yeah, not every employer does things the same way. So maybe they have an industrial mechanic or industrial maintenance person, and that's the title. And that individual has differing levels of training. Well, you're not going to want to take every set of standards and whittle them down to 1 year, but there are cases where it's overkill to do 500 hours or something when only 200 hours is sufficient. And so the business may not want to commit to 5 years in a certain thing when they don't need that. And so you need to understand how a set of standards work and what the standards are so you can help them trim some of the time down. Here's a side-by-side example of that, where I needed to develop a hospitality and retail training, but I needed that training to be a 2,000 hour instead of a 4,000 hour on the left. And so what I did was I crafted the standards to meet my needs for what we plan to do. And so that's the way the businesses are. They only want what they want. And so you work with them to kind of consult on how to craft these standards the way they need to be done. So you need to have that knowledge background to do that.
That is brilliant. Can you go to the next slide too? I think this is just, can you expand on that slide?
Yeah, the last slide was just showing that in addition to changing the hours and adding things to that set of standards like the understanding fraud and credit card security, that's a part of retail, that you need to go into the checklist where a person who is mentoring would sign off on those skills, and you need to put in your Bloom taxonomy of where the competencies that they need to sign off on to approve that and show Department of Labor that they're proficient.
And I just love this. So we can go to the next slide. I love this because you know the product, you know how it works, and you know you can trim it to fit the needs of the employer then as a navigator. So selling the product, you know, you're connecting the right people with each other. I put in here for the value proposition. Everybody wants to know the ROI. Well, there's ROI calculators available. So we put in some URLs for you to see. There's also this cost of turnover tool. It's that I'll show you in just a second, but can you talk about the incumbent worker approach, Lee, just very, very briefly?
Well, one of the things that COVID did also was it shut down our IDES one-stop center. And under WIOA, you're mandated with testing individuals to find out what reading level they're at and giving a baseline assessment so that you can show improvement throughout a process. Well, when you can't meet with people and assess them to move forward under WIOA, there's also the incumbent worker approach for apprenticeships, where an individual's been with the company a minimum of 6 months. You can upskill that individual within the company. And so a lot of the apprenticeships now that I'm working on now are incumbent worker, where they've been with the company and we're upskilling them so that we're continuing to show progress and build out apprenticeship in Illinois.
Right, thank you. And if you, oh, go ahead, Lee.
And if they have a lot of those skills already, you know, it may be a 2-year apprenticeship program, but they can get credit for some of these skills that they already possess, this knowledge that they have, coursework that they have, and get an incumbent worker credit for things that they've already completed.
Absolutely, and because you knew that that's part of the process, that they can get credit for things that they already know, then you can present that to the employer. So the next one is just the cost of turnover tool. We're providing that on Illinois.com. But this is, and Lucinda, you made a point the other day, is that if, you know, people spend a lot on hiring and recruiting. Do you want to embellish just a little?
Yeah, that takes a lot of time, you know, for an employer to recruit for candidates. If you have existing employees already, it may be more cost effective to upscale them, you know, to move them into different kinds of positions as well.
And 2 other return on investments that I'm not sure if we have them in a slide or later is the return on investment that the individual who's doing the mentoring, that's an unintended, uncaptured return on investment, because studies show in apprenticeship that once the individual starts to enjoy the mentoring, sometimes they won't retire, and sometimes they increase their productivity as a result of that contact.
Yes, very good point. So next slide. This is just, the next slide just shows you what they talked about on the business engagement, about using the components of apprenticeship and comparing it to what employers already do. So it's not a huge step sometimes for apprenticeship. But the next slide, this came from a PowerPoint that I saw that CareerWise Colorado put on at the Chicagoland Workforce Funders Alliance. And this they got from a Swiss study that shows, yes, there's definitely going to be some employer cost, and you're going to be kind of on the under at first, but even before the apprentice finishes the program, the employer is receiving a return on their investment and then beyond. And like you said, Lee, there's even unseen ROIs, or the intangible ROIs that we're not putting into the quantifying of the return on investment.
Yeah,
so
and another one is that I found that the businesses are very interested when you tell them that this is training that's approved and used throughout the United States, and this will help with their liability insurance, that if there's an incident, that this individual was trained by something that's approved and been used nationally.
That's a very good point. Yeah. Now, next slide. Question to both you, Lee and Lucinda. Do you ever really get to commitment, or how do you get to that commitment?
That's interesting, because I found that in the healthcare setting, commitment is freely given by the HR people and even the president of the hospital. But boy, does it die when it gets to corporate. They tear that thing apart like nobody's business.
That can happen, and yeah, you can't get discouraged by that. If you spend many, many hours and it just doesn't quite make it there, you still planted a seed though.
Yes.
And maybe the timing isn't right, you know, right now, but that doesn't mean that a year from now it couldn't be.
So it's definitely the long game, and you all have gotten to commitment, yes, but it's never as linear, it seems like. So if you go to the next slide. Okay, tell me about communicating and sharing information. So Lee, can you talk about Navigators helping Navigators?
Yes, it's huge that Navigators help Navigators. You will be going along and you'll find one of these resources that maybe other Navigators haven't found. It's very important that we network with each other and save each other duplication of work. And this is a long game, and it's incumbent upon us to work with each other to save each other learning the hard way.
Yeah, we're not in competition with each other.
That's what I was going to say. I've heard you say that before. You're not in competition, you're in cooperation. And Lee, you talked about tag-alongs. What do you mean by that?
What was the question again? I'm sorry.
You've talked to me about tag-alongs, about tagging along with other Navigators.
Oh, yes, by all means. So if the new Navigators wanted somebody to maybe zoom into a meeting of theirs so that they have somebody that if a question's asked, they just haven't gained that experience level yet, and if it makes them feel more comfortable, I'm available at any time. There are lots of times that I'll schedule a meeting. Maybe I'll reach out to Lucinda and say, hey, you know, I got this meeting down there close to your area. If you want to sit in, come along so we can help each other establish those partnerships.
Yeah, Lee was actually going to help one of the colleges set up as an intermediary, and since that's one of my projects that I've got in the planning, I said, hey, can I tag along with you? You know, I'll be curious about what kinds of questions they may have for you that can help me to prepare when I meet with my colleges. So
I love that.
I think that something that's important about that is that regional borders are not an opportunity to hand off. Regional borders actually present an opportunity to share information and to coordinate even more. So I think as navigators, it is critical. You know, I know you guys have a lot more distance between you, but up in the north, that is really key because the borders and there's so much crossover up here. So it's really important that navigators understand that a border is not an opportunity to hand off, but actually an invitation to better coordination.
I love that. And then one last thing before we move to the next slide. Although your thing is business engagement, you guys get a lot of random requests. So you still handle those, even from potential apprentices, not necessarily employers. And I know that, yeah, go ahead, please.
yeah, it's absolutely. You know, there are a lot of times when I have gotten phone calls from a student interested in pursuing apprenticeship. And so I just kind of talk with them and ask them, you know, are you working for an employer now? Is your schooling applicable to what you're doing on the job, or maybe how you want to move up? Or is there an employer that you're interested in? because that could be an employer I could reach out and talk with and say, hey, we've got a student very interested in coming to work for you. But I also, you then direct that student to the WIOA provider, because if they're in school, they may qualify for some assistance with WIOA funding that they didn't know about. So
I love that. It's making connections and
yes.
all. So next slide, just quickly, because I think all of our phones are dying. There are some challenges that you all have encountered. Lee, can you go first?
Yeah, sometimes you have to, like with Lucinda's option with her employer of maybe using 2 part-times to equal a full-time. You just have to help them think outside the box. Okay, so this is not working, so let's don't do the same thing. Let's go a different route.
Mm-hmm. And how about you, Lucinda?
Yeah, it's changing a mindset. When we first began our roles as navigators, especially in my area, apprenticeship, most people associated apprenticeships with the labor unions. And when I began talking to people, well, they would say, well, that's just for the labor unions. That's not something I can do in my company. So it was, starting from scratch and helping them to understand that, no, it's not just for labor unions. It's not just for large companies. So there's been a lot of that in helping employers to understand what kind of benefit there is involved with this.
Right.
Can I ask in 30 seconds from each of you, how has the U.S. Chamber Talent Pipeline Management facilitated your efforts as a navigator, which will be important for all navigators to understand?
Well, it helps you understand the business process if you don't have a business degree. It helps you understand that the business has to look at what it's been doing and where it wants to go. And so it helps you put a supply chain perspective to people.
Yes. A lot of the employers in my area, what I hear repeatedly is that they can't find candidates, they can't find applicants. And so going through the talent pipeline helped me to understand that there is a supply chain involved, as Lee mentioned. And so that's a conversation that I can begin to have with that employer. Well, have you looked at investigating going through maybe some of your high schools, setting up some part-time internship opportunities so that some of our students can begin to see what work opportunities and career paths are right in their backyard?
I just want to thank both of you so much for your input. I know we've just got the tip of the iceberg here. And for those who are listening and watching this video, Lucinda and Lee have said that they are here for you and to share information so you can reach out to them personally if you want. So thank you both, Lucinda and Lee. Finally, I just want to end this by showing you a couple of resources. So if you go to the next page, if you all go to workforcegps.org and click on communities up top, you will see there's an apprenticeship community and an apprenticeship state expansion grant community. Both of those communities have a wealth of information. You could spend days finding all kinds of information in there. And in fact, you'll find some information that we've actually taken and put on our website. So if you go to the next slide, just showing you that all of our courses have some corresponding handouts that you could print out and put in a binder and start putting together your own Navigator manual. If you go to apprenticeshipillinois.com, click on the resources, and then we've got this apprenticeship professional development. You will see a list of our courses, and they will have the different corresponding handouts as well as the PowerPoint so that you all can use parts of the PowerPoint, take it apart, and use it on your own. If you go to the next slide, besides that, if you go to resources and then go to resource library, we've got all kinds of topics. So you click on a topic and there's a lot of resources there for you. And if you find that you need a certain resource or you're looking for something and it's not there, and let us know, and we can add topics and add more resources, or you want to share some, we will add it. So we appreciate all of your input. Again, thank you all for your time. Patrick, do you want to say anything?
No, thank you all, and I hope this has been value added for everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.